All right. So welcome back to another session. This is our additional piece of what's going on with Carla. So Carla's son had a problem where he had his wisdom teeth extracted. And at the beginning, he was having pain in his jaw. He had been taking arnica, but he was beginning to have pain with movement, which wouldn't be surprising if he was moving his mouth. But if he moved his foot, his jaw would hurt. And so we said, what can we do about this? And we looked at rubrics like remedies from that are associated with injury and trauma and extraction and aggravation from motion. And we asked Carla to give him some bryonia. And the bryonia calmed that down. And then she calls us back 2 days later, and we're going to go ahead and listen one more time to what she has to say. Oh, sorry, there she is in reverse. And we're going to listen one more time. Oh, hi, Bobby. Welcome. I'm so glad to see you here. So we're going to listen to what she has to say. Now, we've talked before about how there are different stages that happen in an illness. The early stage of some kind of acute illness, whether it's a trauma or injury or flu or epidemic typhoid or whatever. The first thing is an inflammatory stage. And so the remedies that are very strongly associated with inflammation are the ones that often show up there. We start out with things like ferrum phos and belladonna and, that kind of stuff. And then we get into the middle stage where the body is starting to mount a response. And this is where the vital force has really engaged whatever this morbific influence is. And a lot of our strong polycrusts show up in this part. You guys may have heard you can give aconite for almost any ailment in the first 24 hours, but after that, it's not so likely to work. And the reason for that is because aconite is one of those remedies that really starts out with the inflammation stage. But once you get into the later stages, not really a happening thing. So then you give these middle of the range remedies. And then at the end, maybe all the white blood cells went and fought the brave fight with the microbes. And then you end up with pus. You end up with exudation. You end up with gunk that the body's discharging. And this is where you end up with things like hepersulf. And so the same illness may call for aconite at the beginning, and then maybe calc phos in the middle, and then maybe hepersulf at the end, or just a dose of sulfur. So very often when I was first learning, I would think, well, I gave aconite and it worked at first and then it didn't work anymore. And I thought, oh, maybe I didn't make such a good remedy choice, but that's not true. It's just that the vital force has moved on doing its work in a different stage. So let's find out what happened when Carla's son took the bryonia. She's going to give us a little update on that. And then we're going to find out, as the vital force moves on, what's happening now. Okay, you guys ready?
Yes, I'm calling about my son again. He's the one that had his wisdom teeth out. I talked to you a few days ago. Right, he's doing much better. The swelling has gone down, but he seems to have a different problem now. Where the stitches are in his mouth, where the actual stitches are, he says he's having quite a bit of pain there. And he says what it feels like is that the stitches are really cold. That when he actually breathes in, it's so cold where those stitches are that it makes a shooting pain go up where the teeth were, into the gum area where the teeth were, actually into his head. He feels like there's a shooting pain. So I was wondering if I should keep giving him what you prescribed, or if you wanted to try something else again.
Okay. So let's go into our repertorization. I just love getting to talk about the repertory. Okay. Um, all right. So we've got, last time we had some of these initial rubrics, but the homework was to find rubrics that had to do with shooting. So he's got this cold sensation where the stitches are, which is right there at the top part of where the tooth was removed at the gum line, and a sensation of coldness there. So these are our two choices. We can find it in the mouth section, or we can find it in the tooth section. And we had a conversation last time. Could it really apply to the tooth? Because the tooth isn't there anymore. Really, it's in the gums. So, and we would have to sit down and talk with Dr. Kent. Or we can go through each of these remedies in here and look back. We can track back into Materia Medica and say, was this felt in the tooth itself, in the root of the tooth? Did this condition where there's pain felt at the stitches that's shooting, a neuralgic pain at the stitches, is often referred to as dry socket. And it's what happens when you don't get a good scab forming in the socket that is protecting the exposed nerve, assuming that there is any nerve left there. If they took out your tooth, it should all be gone. But that's not always how it works out. So in this case, if it's the root of the tooth with the neuralgia, doesn't that make sense that we would use the tooth rubric versus the mouth rubric? A lot of times I just don't know. And so in a circumstance like this, I would tend to add these two together, to merge them together, or to see what came up in both of them. Does that make sense? So we talked about that last time. And then we talked about the cold air. When he breathes in cold air, that's really irritating. And then we wanted to leave our etiology in here, even though it's a teeny tiny rubric, isn't it? But this is what was going on. There was an extraction, and so we kind of ought to pay attention to that. And then there's a trauma. And so an injury, even though it was being done on your behalf, your body doesn't really know that. Your body just says, oh my God, I was minding my own business and somebody came and yanked one of my teeth out and it's bad. So this is why injuries is such a good rubric to use after surgery. So then the homework last time was to say, what rubrics do we use that have to do with the neuralgic pain, the shooting pain that is associated with this? So here are two choices. And if you've got your repertory handy, grab out your repertory. And I want to talk about which of these is more specific and the idea of granularity. Have you guys heard that term before, granularity? It's a data term, and it basically is related to size. Like you've got little bitty granules of sugar and great big boulders. So when we think about granularity of a remedy, that gives us ideas that there are tiny little details that may be insignificant in most cases, relevant in some cases. Oh, guys, I had the most amazing case of somebody who was just quoting Materia Medica, and it was so cool. I was looking up, while we were talking, I was looking up in Herring's Guiding Symptoms, and it was word for word. When the person is really in that state, it's so amazing. Okay, so let's go back to granularity. There are some things that are little tiny details, and then there are other things that are big, broad things. So we've got granularity in materia medica. If you were to open up, say, Morrison's Desktop Guide, do you guys have this book? Morrison's Desktop Guide, and you open it up in here and you take a look, and he has these things that have little diamonds by them, and those are keynote things. Anything with one of those little black diamonds, those are things that really, if somebody woke you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, tell me one thing about the remedy chelidonium, you should be able to say abdominal pain that extends to the right scapula. Anything with one of those diamonds, you should memorize that, and you should know that about your remedy so well that if you woke up in the middle of the night and somebody asked you about it, you could tell them. Now, note that there's a whole bunch of stuff here. There's 2 pages of stuff here, and there's 2 black diamonds. So we're not asking you to learn everything, but these are things that are so important and so core and common for that remedy that we always want to have those. The granularity of those little diamond things is boulder size. So it's very, very big. All right, just like we have granularity in materia medica with little details that are like sand and great big details that are like boulders, those translate into rubrics in the materia medica or in the repertory, where some things are tiny details and they're maybe a little unusual and you would only expect to see a few remedies in there. And then other things are great big boulders. So we might see a rubric here like teeth pain extraction after that's only got 6 remedies in it. You know, think about where dentistry was when Kent was doing his work in 1890 to 1920. Think about where dentistry was then. It was grim. Not a lot of anesthesia. If somebody pulled a tooth out, it was really bad. And so people avoid, exactly. Carol says, ouch. Yeah, people avoided all that stuff. So tooth extractions were not very common in Kent's time. Bobby says, I thought when there were too few remedies in a rubric, you didn't use it. Well, some people teach it that way. And I usually don't. What I usually say is that we want to look at the different layers of granularity. And we have to ask ourselves a reality test question. You know, we already have our 3 test questions for doing a rubric set. Is it true? Is it useful? Is it something else that would, is there something else that would improve the set? So we have those 3 questions about selecting rubrics. But even before we select a rubric, I think that we need to look at a rubric and say, is it reasonable that out of the entire 3,000 remedies we have to work with, really only 6 of them would apply here? Does that seem reasonable? And if that doesn't seem reasonable, then what I will do is look for a larger, more general rubric, a rubric with a larger granularity, something that is broader and larger in scope. But it doesn't mean that I'm not also going to look at the tooth extraction. So the larger rubric that I chose here that we talked about last time was generalities, injuries, blows, falls, and bruises. And these injuries are much more general. There's a lot in here that has nothing to do with tooth extractions. But everything in there has to do with trauma to some kind of tissue. So we're kind of going to be in the zone. It's not as specific. Now, one strategy is to add these 2 rubrics together to make sure that the tooth extractions are included with the injuries. I usually like to see both of them. I want to see Kent knew what the trauma from tooth extractions was about. And it didn't happen as often, and he didn't have as many remedies. If you look in some of the newer rubrics, it's going to be bigger. But I want to see what he knew. I'm not going to discard it, but I also am going to make sure that I cover my bases a little more broadly, because I can't really believe that only 6 remedies apply to tooth extractions. Does that make sense, Bobby? That we look at a small level, a tiny granularity, and also look at the larger. Yes? And we can do it either by listing them together or by adding them together. So then the last piece that we had to put in here, she said that her son had coldness at the stitches. It was really bad from inhaling cold air. And this is where we've got cold air aggravates. And then we needed to add one more thing here where there was shooting pain. She said that with the cold air, there was pain that went into where the tooth was, into the jaw, and she said it actually went into his head. So again, do we look at this just in the tooth section? Do we look at it just in the mouth section? Because she says that it was pain that went into his head, I think it makes sense for us to include both of these, both head pain, shooting, and teeth pain, neuralgic. Now notice we've got different terms here. Kent used shooting as a way of describing neuralgic pain. He also used the term lancinating, which is like a sharp, pokey thing, and stitching. All of those can represent pain that is associated with a triggered nerve. When any of those things could apply, he uses the term neuralgic, which means any kind of nerve pain. Okay? Ah, that's a good thought. Dot says, what about teeth sensitive, tender to air? Yes, that would be right in here with teeth, pain, coldness aggravates. If there was something like teeth pain shooting with air, teeth sensitive to air, all of those things are going to pull in those remedies that are worse from breathing in the air. Yeah, good. Mouth pain, stitching, gums, that's also very good. Because really, he's got these stitches in his gums that's the sequela of the tooth extraction. So there are going to be some remedies I would expect in that mouth pain, stitching, gums that are related to tooth extractions. Let's take a look and see what's in there. Okay, mouth, pain, gums. Oh, we've got to go to the sensation first. Stitching in the gums. Okay. So we've got some remedies here that are really well known for this kind of thing, particularly nitric acid and strontium carb are very well associated with this. Nitric acid is a common remedy to give after oral surgery if you have a client that has a lot of pain, or another common remedy is sulfuric acid when somebody has had a dental extraction and it just keeps bleeding and bleeding and bleeding and it doesn't stop bleeding. Both nitric acid and sulfuric acid are very useful in those kinds of situations. Okay, yeah, so we can put that guy in there too. All right, so now we've got our rubric set, And our rubric set has multiple levels of granularity. We've brought our focus in narrow, and we've taken our focus out wide, so that when I was first in school and Lynn Amara was teaching repertory for me, she used to say, you want to get your net out there far enough to catch as many fish as you need. When you choose only small rubrics, your net is going to be too narrow, and you're not going to be able to see everything that you need. So look at the size of these rubrics. 30 to 50 is a really good size rubric for Kent's repertory. Now in the newer repertories, 200, 300, 500 can be common. And a lot of times people will say, well, if it has less than 30 remedies, I'm not going to include it. If it has more than 200 remedies, I'm not going to include it because those things don't help me. That's not my approach. I include them because I want to see what's in them. Okay, so let's look and see what the repertorization is for that chart. All right. So we've got the neuralgic shooting pain that was our additional feature from last time, and our stitching pain. And I want you to think back to what I said earlier about the stage of the illness. Belladonna comes right up here front. So does aconite. If this was brand new right after the extraction in the inflammatory stage, these would be fantastic choices. But now, after 5 days, are they likely to be good choices? Not so much. We're not so likely to see a benefit from those remedies at this point because we are further on in the stage of development. Okay, the next remedy that comes up here, do you guys know this remedy? Yeah, Dot says Plantago has a great affinity for teeth. And so this is a remedy that should be coming up in these later stages, and it almost never comes up in repertorization. It's very rare that you see it. You have to, because it's not very well represented in the repertory. So when things like this come up, you really got to pay attention and take a look at them. Okay, this is a really strong option. Plantago is very often given in tincture, where people would take a drop of the tincture and put it on a cotton ball and put it in their mouth alongside the place where it hurt. And plantain, the plant itself, very, very common for herbalists to go gather it and make tinctures for that purpose. Okay, Pulsatilla. I want you to think about what stage Pulsatilla is likely to appear. Less likely to be at the beginning, more likely to be in the middle and in the late stages, the consolidative phase. Camphora. Camphora is going to be coming forward here because it has such a strong modality of coldness. If you read Materia Medica about camphora, it has coldness that doesn't seem to bother the person. Like they're really cold, but they want to be uncovered, unclothed, aggravated by cold air. It's a remedy that's used after trauma. Think about all those Chinese medicine patches that they have where you put camphor patch on something, and that all the tiger balm stuff, all that has camphor in it. So it's a vulnerary. Now, as I look at these remedies, I usually go through at least the first 20 to 30. And oftentimes you'll see cases presented where the remedy given is right up here in these first few. I think sometimes that makes me lazy. And I think, well, let's just give one of these first things. I can make a good argument for it. Let's go with it. But I think that Hahnemann was incredibly conscientious about going through a whole set of these things and taking a look at which of these could apply, which is the strongest, what are we doing here? Okay, chamomilla has aggravation from cold air. This again would be more likely, it's a common remedy in tooth pain, it would be more likely up front with belladonna and aconite in the inflammatory stage. Think how common it's given for teething complaints when all that inflammation of the gum is given with little bitty ones. Nux vomica has a strong affinity to the nerves. Excuse me. And so you can imagine why that's coming up. Rus tox. I'm kind of, rus tox is aggravated by coldness. It's got neuralgic pain. Does it have a particularly strong affinity for teeth? Nothing in here in teeth coldness, nothing here in teeth extraction. Now, Bobby, this would be a good example of why it's useful to include both the small granularity and the big one. I can see what's the sphere of action of rus tox, at least as far as Kent was concerned. Okay, so we can go through each one of these and say, where does it apply? How does it apply? Conium is showing up here for injury because it's neurological. It's got the stitching in the gums, which was Valerie's good suggestion. It's got neurological pain, and it's got injury. But does it have anything to do with teeth? No. Arnica? No. Nux moschata, how weird is that? Nux moschata is made from nutmeg, and it's a common remedy for neurological migraines. But I think in this case, unlikely. Now we can go through all of these in detail. Since we're about to end up our time together, I'm going to give you what was the remedy that was given. The remedy choice given was ledum, and he had coldness and in the teeth. And the reason why that was given was because in the moment when I was in a hurry trying to help this woman on the phone, cold of a tooth extraction, ledum is associated with penetrations into the body. And so it was something that she had in her home kit on hand, and I asked her to give it to him. It was my first shot before I thought about anything else. Very often, I will have a thing like this in my head that, honestly, let's be honest, it's not as good an option as some of these other things. And then we kind of have to balance. Well, can the person get that remedy? Is Plantago available locally in anybody's Whole Foods? No. Is this something where she can come by my office today and pick it up? Then we would have been in good shape. But you know what? I didn't think of it. So this is such a beautiful example of why the remedy is, or why the repertory is so valuable to us. It brings to mind all those things that are beyond what we would think of with our own pure brain. And this is why Hahnemann got us started using the repertory to begin with. Okay? Any questions about that? So what happened was that he took a couple doses of 30C ledum and the pain completely went away, and he went through the rest of the healing process without pain, swelling, difficulty, and then he was all done with his chapter of wisdom teeth extraction. Now, does that mean that had I given him Plantago or Camphora or Staphysagria, which is common for extractions, or anything else in here, Hypericum, if I had given any of those, does the fact that the ledum worked mean that those others might not have? I don't think we can say that, And so I want you to delete from your mind the idea that there's one right remedy. I believe that there are reasonable remedies that are likely to act and less reasonable remedies that are less likely to act. And so we gave him something that was likely to act that worked for him. Oh, Bobby, that's a good point. Bobby says, so you gave him 2 remedies, although we were talking about 3 stages. Right. And not everybody calls in each of the different stages. Not each person is going to come back to you, but you need to be aware that there are these different stages, an early stage, a later stage. You know, as you're looking at stuff and trying to figure out, does this remedy apply? It can help you to be aware, is this an early stage remedy, a late stage remedy? And you find that, basically, you find that out by looking at sudden onset, the remedies that have sudden onset and high velocity, their symptoms come on quickly. Those tend to be the early onset inflammatory remedies. And the remedies where symptoms come on slowly or where they form pus, where they get suppurative, anything that has the word suppurative, you're going to find that in a later stage remedy. Okay? You guys have questions? Yes, perfect. Bobby says, so to review, when you get a second or third call, you look at the symptoms, and if they're new or very different, you look at different remedies. Right. The initial symptoms of aggravation from motion, that was completely gone. Hooray. And so there was no need for us to go back and revisit that. We had to look at, what does it look like now? And we shouldn't really be surprised if the symptoms change over time, because the vital force is adapting. Okay, guys, thank you so much for your participation today. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next repertory session. Have a great day. Bye-bye.